The School Foundation of Florence School District 1 is pleased to announce the 2015-2016 grant cycle for both major grants and mini classroom grants. This presentation has been developed to provide potential grant writers with an overview of the funding process, the review process, and to provide ongoing support as you are preparing your own proposal. We hope you'll refer to this presentation throughout the development process. We hope that you'll refer to the resources that are provided so that your grant has all of the elements that are required for consideration. The School Foundation was initially put into place so that it could provide support for all teachers in Florence School District 1, specifically in terms of major grants. What the Foundation Board Review Committee hopes to see in grants are those kinds of concepts that promote excellence in academic achievement, that build community involvement, or that encourage innovative leadership. There's a broad range of concepts that are very appropriate, and we encourage you to be creative as you develop the idea that you'll send forth for review. All grant applications are reviewed on a competitive basis. What that means is you'll want to develop the very best proposal that you can, because only a limited number of grants in both categories may be awarded. Your School Foundation Board is proud to announce that the 2015-16 funding total is over $119,000. These funds will be distributed among major grants and mini grants, and we look forward to placing these funds in your hands as you put into place innovative programs across our district. One of the most important things to keep in mind as you begin the application process is the deadline for submission of your application. This year, the application deadline is April the 17th at 3:30 p.m. Please note that no late submissions will be accepted. The School Foundation funds two types of grants. Major grants are those that seek to have a big impact, a broad impact across the school district, and to prepare students for success in a worldwide economy. Many grants are designed for the classroom. They're designed to support teachers who'd like to bring innovative learning opportunities into their own classrooms. In this presentation, we'll look specifically at the requirements for the major grants. Let's think a little bit about the major grants. The first thing to consider when writing a major grant is that the minimum award is $10,000. This type of grant should have broad impact across the district. In other words, this is not a type of project that would be unique for a single classroom. The monies that you receive for this project may be used to purchase materials that are needed, to hire consultants, but the funds may not be used for a salary for yourself or for other employees of the district, or to pay for major equipment purchases unless you convince the grant review committee that those equipment purchases are absolutely critical to your project and there's no other way to finance them. Do remember that funds are to be used for the major grants to supplement existing programs, not to replace them. And also note that once materials have been received, they remain the property of the school that was the recipient unless other approvals have been granted by the School Foundation. Just a few more details concerning the major grants. First, while the winning grant will be announced during this current school year, do note that the funding period cannot begin before August 2015. Also, all funds must be completely spent during the school year that the grant is funded. There are 4 progress reports that must be submitted throughout the academic year, and the dates for those progress reports will be discussed and determined with the grant award winners. And finally, note that the site visits that are conducted by the School Foundation staff and the board during the grant period are designed for you to show off all the great things that you're doing with your project. These are opportunities for your school and for your grant to gain publicity and for us to celebrate the good work of the project. Before you begin writing a major grant, here are some questions that you may want to consider. These questions will help to guide you in your writing and help you to clearly determine that your concept is actually an appropriate concept for a major grant. First, the review committee will want to look at your concept to determine if it's an innovative solution to a problem or an issue that you identify. Next, we'll want to see if the concept that you have outlined has true promise for improving your school by addressing a school-wide issue. In other words, major grants should address something that is happening across your school as opposed to in a single classroom. And last, the review committee will want to consider your proposal in terms of the perceived capacity you have to actually put it into place and carry it out to completion. In just a few moments, we'll look at the specific format for submitting a major grant. But before we do so, take a look at these questions. These are some of the stumbling blocks that sometimes grant writers face. We want you to be aware of them from the very beginning. First of all, are the statement of purpose and procedures for carrying out your project super clear? We want to be sure that we fully understand exactly what you are planning to do through this project. Second, have you created an evaluation plan that is appropriate for the project? This is not a perfunctory portion of the project proposal. We want to be sure that you are going to measure results, measure the outcomes of your project. And third, we'll want to look carefully at your budget to be sure that it's both reasonable and sufficiently detailed. Be sure that you spend ample time on each of these areas so that your proposal has its best chance of being funded. The Grants Committee of the School Foundation Board will carefully review each major grant proposal application. We will use the rubric you see pictured on the right to score each section of your proposal. We provide the rubric in advance for two reasons. First, we want you to know exactly how you'll be scored, including the weight of each area. And secondly, we want you to use this rubric as a template to inform the development of your proposal itself. The School Foundation Board has developed a new template for grant writers. The entire template will be available on the School Foundation Board website, and you're encouraged to type your proposal directly into that template, and note that the space will adjust as needed in each of the sections. Should you have tables, charts, or illustrations to be included, you may embed them directly in the template, or it may be easier to include them as an attachment. Be sure to reference the attachment as Attachment 1 or 2, and to include a reference to that attachment within the template in the section to which it applies. Let's look at each section of both the rubric and the template. Section A, this is your grant request cover sheet, a copy of which is positioned to the right. This should be the first page of your grant proposal form, and it should be completely filled out and must be signed by both the project director and the appropriate administrator, and that could be your principal, your director, or the superintendent. There are no points earned for this. However, a grant will not be reviewed without the appropriate cover sheet with the appropriate signatures. Section B of your proposal is entitled the Executive Summary. Essentially what this section will do, in 1 page or less, is give a description of what you want to do with the funds you will receive. What this will do is give us, as we are readers of your proposal, the big picture of what you want to do, why you want to do it, in general how you'll do it, and what benefits you think will result from the funding of this project. Essentially here, sell us on your project. We want you to paint the picture of what we will see when we come several months later into your classroom after your project is funded. Tell us what we'll see. Tell us what the students will be doing, tell us what teachers will be doing, and tell us how this is going to benefit your school. Again, here's your very general way to sell us on both the purpose of the proposal, the way you'll put it in place, your procedures, and the benefits. But you must keep it to 1 page or less. As you can see, the point value for this section is only 5 points. But this is a much more important section than the point value would suggest, because this is the time for you to sort of whet our appetite for what is to come. Section C is the statement of need. You can see that it carries a point value of 10. This section is really important because what you'll be doing here is describing for us what's happening in your classrooms, in your school, or even in the district that indicate need. For example, you might look at a certain population that's at risk and tell how that population is at risk or why they are in need. Maybe you'll refer to test scores and a specific aspect of our test scores and tell us why these scores are low and who's scoring poorly, and that creates the need. Maybe you'll talk about behavior or discipline referrals. Maybe you'll talk about a lack of exposure to something that is widely available, but our students don't have access. There are lots of ways to state the need, but here you're going to be telling us not so much about what your proposal is, but instead the circumstances or the data that tells us that a change is needed, that something supplemental is needed beyond what we currently have in place. Here you're going to tell us about the students. You're going to tell us about the need. Section D follows with your response to the need. You probably very quickly noted that the point value for this section is 25. That immediately tells of the importance of this section. Here you will address how you will specifically and directly respond to the need that you just described in Section C. You'll tell about your project. You'll tell how the project is going to respond to the need. You'll give details, especially include evidence from research that tells how this instructional approach has responded to a similar need in other settings. We are looking here for something innovative and something creative, and also something that can be replicated later on perhaps in other schools or across the district. We want to know here that you have thoughtfully considered that need and you've created a proposal, a project idea that is absolutely going to not only impress the committee with its innovation and the creative approaches that you're planning, but also it's going to impress the students who will be engaged with it. It will sort of light a fire for the students and thus enhance their learning. One caution that we provide here is be sure that if you include data, theories, hypotheses, be sure that you explain them for a non-education audience. Be careful not to use buzzwords or acronyms that you don't fully explain. Many of the review committee members are not educators, and therefore traditional language that might be common in the educational field might not be familiar to some of the reviewers. So be sure that you're careful about that. Again, in this section, you're going to tell us how this project will respond to the need that you previously described. Several of the next sections in the proposal template are intertwined. To that end, we have created a template that will help you to sketch out your ideas so that they will flow nicely together and have the interrelated components that are required for success. You can see that section E requires you to identify your goal or your objective. Section F will require you to give your methods, your techniques, your procedures for implementation. Also, part of section F will require you to identify the materials that will be involved. And section I requires you to evaluate. And as you can see from the way that this template is laid out, the evaluation measures need to match with the materials and with the methods and ultimately with the goal that you have planned. So for each goal that you plan, you will also need a unique and specific evaluation measure, or you will need to explain the evaluation measure, a single evaluation measure, in terms of how it will yield data on each of the goals that you identify. Now, in a few moments, we'll look at each of these individually, but I encourage you as you plan to take this template and plan your goals and match your evaluations to those goals before you begin writing the sort of official narrative that you'll include with your proposal. Pictured here is a very rough example of how this mind map, this template, can be used to sort of frame your thinking as you begin to plan your project. You can see that in this example, there are 3 goals listed. Each goal has an associated method or procedure, the materials that are required, and ways that evaluation will take place. Again, for this mind map, this is just a rough sketch to ensure that as you're planning, you've got the required alignment in place so that every goal has outlined procedures and methods, materials, and also evaluation measures that will match up to those goals, and ultimately to illustrate how those goals and your success on those goals has been met. Let's now look at each of these sections and begin to think about how you will use this information to complete the remainder of the written portion of your project proposal. Section E requires you to identify very specifically, clearly and succinctly your project goals or objectives or the impact that you expect to occur. You can see that the point value for this section is 20. Therefore, the importance of this section is very clear. What we'd like to see here are very clear statements of what you hope to have happen, what you hope the impact of your project to be, either on academic success, on behavioral changes, on teachers, on the curriculum, some district change that you expect. So there's a wide range of possible areas for impact, but the goal must be stated in a very specific way so that we know that it can be measurable. Now later on you'll tell how you'll measure it, but as you're writing your goals, you want to keep in mind that it must be measurable, and you will need to specifically state how that will happen. A hint that I'd provide as a reader of many of the proposals that come through the School Foundation, I recommend that you number your goals. If you have more than one goal, I recommend that you number them. That will make it very easy for us as we read your proposal to later on see what goal number 1 is, but under the evaluation section, we'll be able to see very clearly how you intend to measure goal number 1. So I really encourage you, if you have multiple goals, to number them, delineate them in a way that will make it very easy for the reader to sort of follow the thread of that goal through your from the goal to procedures to evaluation. Section F requires you as the grant writer to identify the methods, the techniques, the procedures that will align with each of your goals, and also the materials that will be necessary to put these methods, techniques, and procedures into place. You do not have to follow the format that is used in the template here, but you may want to consider using it because it ensures that you do not fail to identify all of the methods that will be needed for each of the goals that you identified. The assumption in the template here is that you have identified earlier 3 goals. So what methods will be necessary for each of the goals? And then over to the right, what materials will be needed? Another way to do this is strictly with narrative. Either way is fine, but the important thing is that the review committee can easily tell that you have created a set of procedures that make sense and that align with the goals that you earlier identified. This section has a point value of 10 points. It's also a very important section of your project. While Section G, the timetable for completion, only represents 5 points of your total points, it is still a very important section of your proposal because this section will help the review committee to understand how this project's going to sort of lay out across the academic year. Some suggestions that I'd offer here: begin with the month in which you expect to receive funding and hit the ground running. Plan aggressively to get this project going and in place. There are many discussions that occur when the committee takes a look at the timetable and say the project doesn't even actually seem to be getting it going until November or December. One of the things that the committee typically wants to see is that this project is going to have a big impact very quickly. And the reason that the timetable can begin, say, in August is because you've done such a tremendous job in the planning in terms of the proposal that there won't be needed time for planning or figuring out details. All of that has been taken care of in the actual plan, so you'll be ready to go in August. Some successful projects include a month-by-month timetable. Others hit key benchmarks in the project itself. For example, when training will begin, or on a new curriculum, or when certain specific activities will happen. So there's no expectation that you provide a month-by-month timetable. Instead, create a timetable that works with the specific project that you are developing and that you have conceptualized. Section 8 also represents 5 points in your total score. This is your plan for sustainability. Committee members here will be looking for you to explain how this project will continue beyond the funding year. As you know, a project is only funded for a single year. So how will we know that this project will continue beyond this initial year? What will you do? Will you include plans for securing additional funding that might be needed? Does the project itself lend itself to continuing across multiple years? Is there some other kind of strategy that you have in place that will let us know that this is not just a one-year project, but instead something that will continue for many years to come? While this is only a 5-point section of your proposal, this is something that I've found that committee members are very interested in ensuring is in place. We want the funds that we share with teachers to be the type of funding that will have an impact not just with a single year or a single group of students, but will instead have a much longer term impact. We'll want you to plan for example, breakage. What if you are requesting certain materials to be purchased? What is the lifespan of the materials? And if it has a short lifespan, how will you plan for the project to continue should the materials break or be consumables, for example? So be sure to think about, where will this project go beyond the initial funding year? Section I requires you to define the way that each of your goals will be evaluated. This is your evaluation plan, and it has a point value of 10 points. I would suggest that the point value really does not represent the importance of this section, because the review committee is always very interested in being absolutely sure that the goals or objectives that you identified earlier can truly be measured so that we can clearly understand the success or the impact of the project that you are proposing. It's very important that you have measurable objectives or goals so that you can successfully complete this section of your project. So what is the plan for evaluating each of your goals, and what is the timeline for conducting that evaluation? If a single evaluation tool will be used for, say, multiple goals, that's fine to identify it in that way, but be sure that you define that in your description of your evaluation plan. Again, be sure also that you identify the timeline for conducting the evaluation. For example, does your project require a pre-assessment, multiple ongoing formal assessments, and a summative assessment? Will you be using informal types of evaluation tools? Are you going to use surveys, for example? One other thing I would suggest here is if you indicate that you're going to use some sort of a formal assessment measure, a survey or something like that, please include the survey or the assessment measure as an attachment. This is really important because we want to know that you've thought through this evaluation process prior to submitting your actual proposal. Section J of your project proposal is the itemized budget. While this section is valued at only 5 points, it too is a very important section because it outlines for the review committee the way that the school foundation funding will be spent. Here you're asked to provide every item for which funding is requested, the cost for those items, the time that those items will be purchased, and the source of the funding that will be required. And the reason that we identify the source of the funding is that in some cases, proposals include in-kind contributions from other sources, or perhaps school foundation funds will be used to purchase a portion of what's needed for the project, but other school or district funds will be used for other portions of the project. In this case, you'll want to define specifically the source of those in-kind contributions or the source of other funds with written assurances from the district that those funds are definitely committed. These assurances can be provided in an attachment from the appropriate administrator. Some people find this section to be quite difficult to complete. I've included here a possible way to lay out your budget, but there are many other possibilities for formatting. The important thing to remember is that we want to know where all money is going, the cost for very specific items, when you expect to purchase those items, and if the money comes from outside sources, where that source is. Many successful project writers include actual quotes from companies on the items that they want to purchase. They include documentation that includes, for example, shipping costs. So you want to be certain that you have very carefully itemized the ways that in which the funding that you are proposing will be spent throughout the life of the project. Just one final note concerning your budget. The sheer size of the budget for your project is so great that failing to include sales tax could be a huge problem. So don't forget to calculate and include sales tax if it is indicated, given the kinds of expenditures you expect to have in your project. Section K is your closing summary. With a point value of 5 points, this section is a relatively short section, just a few sentences, and it gives you an opportunity to provide a quick overview to the project and your commitment to making certain that it proceeds from start to finish and is ultimately successful. I encourage you to make this, even though it's a short section, make it tremendously strong and powerful. Make certain that when your review committee completes the review, this final statement seals the deal. So that completes a look at the Major Grants template. Let's look at a few last reminders. First, do note that your proposals, including the template, may not exceed 20 pages in length. They're due no later than April the 17th at 3:30, and you should submit an original with original signatures and 9 copies. All should be submitted to the Assistant Superintendent for Instruction's office at the Dargan Street office of the Florence School District 1. Your school foundation will acknowledge receipt of your application, so you'll want to be looking for that. And finally, note that there are no exceptions given should your major grant application be missing any of the required elements. So we encourage you to double check, be sure that you have those original signatures, be sure that you have all 9 copies before you submit the project. We've tried to outline in great detail the way in which many grants and major grant proposals should be written. But still, there are additional questions that we have learned pop up in the course of the writing process. We'll try to respond to those most frequently asked questions in the slides that follow. What about the review process? Grants are reviewed by the Foundation Grants Committee, and every complete grant application is reviewed. It depends on the number of grant requests and the complexity of the applications, but generally that process takes about 30 days. Sometimes the committee might ask for more information from you. from your school administrators or the curriculum coordinators. And in terms of the major grant awards, the top 3 major grant candidates will be required to give a presentation on their proposed grants to the committee, and that presentation will last about 60 minutes, and typically it's held at your school site. Finally, applications that are recommended by funding by the committee will be reviewed and approved by the entire board of directors of the school foundation. And once all grant materials have been received, they remain property of the school that was the recipient of the grant unless otherwise approved by the school foundation. The Grants Committee uses a combination of objective and subjective criteria to evaluate grant proposals. The rubric that we considered a little bit earlier is an example of the objective criteria, and of course the more of those criteria that are met yields a more favorable rating during the evaluation process. There are other criteria that we look for, things like innovation and creativity. We look for elements of student achievement growth, but we also look for student changes in terms of motivation and character development. So achievement's not the only measure of success or measure of a high-quality grant. Unfortunately, we're not able to fund all of the requests due to the constraints of the budget. What we do promise, though, is to review every complete grant and to provide feedback about why certain grants are funded and others are not. We never want a writer to believe that a rejected request is because the concept is not appropriate or the writing was unsatisfactory. More questions? Who can apply for a grant? The process is open to all instructional staff within the district, and applications are available on the School Foundation website and on the Florence School District 1 website. Note that major grants are submitted to the Assistant Superintendent for Instruction's office on Dargan Street in Florence, while mini grants are submitted to the School Foundation office on West Chevis Street in Florence. Both major grants and mini grants both must be received on or before 3:30 p.m. on April 17, 2015. And in both cases, for both major grants and mini grants, you must submit 1 original and 9 copies. The Grants Committee of the School Foundation will evaluate the applications and make a recommendation to the Board of Directors. The rubric that we reviewed earlier is used to guide that evaluation process. Definitely include the name of the organization, the contact person, and his or her immediate supervisor or principal on the cover page of the project application. This is really important so that you can be contacted in case the review committee has questions. Notification of grant funding is made about 30 days after the proposal deadline. Now, should you desire funding for more than 1 year, please note that you must resubmit your application each year. The School Foundation does not fund multiple year projects. How much funding should you request? For major grants, it must be $10,000 or greater, and it must have the potential for district-wide impact. Many grants, however, are specifically designed to change something that's happening in the classroom, and those must range between $200 and $500. You may recreate the application on a computer. We ask that you use Times New Roman 12-point font. You also may take advantage of the electronic template for completion of the proposal as well. Signatures are required. All applications must contain original signatures of the contact person, the supervisor, the principal, And please note that if you are submitting a grant that includes technology, such as iPads, iPods, computers, e-readers, any of those kinds of current instructional technology pieces, the Director of Instructional Technology must also sign off on those grants. Do note that there are special requirements if your grant involves iPods or iPads. First, you really need to speak with the Director of Instructional Technology in the planning stages to be sure that your concept fits with the FSD1 technology plan for your school. After the proposal is completed, IT will also need to sign that they approve your plan if it is funded. The second requirement is that all teachers who will receive or use the iPods or iPads through TSF grants must complete the Florence School District 1 iPod/iPad class, and it can be taken during the 2015-16 fall semester if needed. So please note that you'll need to provide a letter from Florence School District 1 stating that the course has been successfully completed as a part of your grant application. There is a limit on the number of pages that may be submitted for both major grants and mini grants. Major grants may not exceed 20 pages, and that includes a single page for the cover sheet, the executive summary, and the budget, and the remaining 17 pages are used to provide the narrative for all other sections of the major grant proposal. Mini grants may not exceed 7 pages. And those 7 pages include a single cover sheet page followed by the template that includes coverage of all other required sections. After the proposal review process is complete, the School Foundation will host an awards reception in May at the Florence County Library. Additionally, follow-up visits to instructional areas may be made by members of the School Foundation Board of Directors and the Executive Director. We hope that this presentation will provide you with some initial support as you begin to think about your project, and also ongoing support as you develop the proposal and prepare it for submission. If you have additional questions, however, please contact Mr. Randy Kuhn, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction, or Mrs. Debbie Heiler, Executive Director of the School Foundation Board. Thank you for considering the grant process, and we wish you the best of luck as you move forward.